Hello there, and I hope you are ready for a 100-question quiz on the 1960s. Please share your score in the comments at the end. And let's go to number 1. Which of the following cultural groups appeared in the 1960s? The hippies, Asian Welsh, or gangsters? And hippies is the answer. Number 2, in which area did the hippies start their movements? In the US, the UK, or Russia? The United States. What was Woodstock? Music and art fair, a history fair, or a dancing show? A music and art fair. When was the National Organization for Women created? 1964, 1960, or 1966? 1966. Who wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X in 1969? Maya Angelou, Alex Haley, or Kurt Vonnegut? Alex Haley. Which of the following books by Robert A. Heinlein was not published in the 1960s? Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, or The Moon is a Harsh Mistress? Starship Troopers. Complete the name of the book published in 1962. We Have Always Lived in the Castle, Heaven, or Heart? Castle. Which of the famous walls was built in 1961? The Berlin Wall, the China Wall, or the Western Wall? The Berlin Wall. What was the name of the famous painting by Robinson Murray in 1966? Mystique, Mystery, or Musical? Mystique. Which of the following is not an artist of the 1960s? Roy Lichtenstein, Donald Judd, or George Orwell? George Orwell. Which famous artist died in 1962? Ethel Schwabacher, Beulah Stevenson, or Franz Kline? Franz Kline. Which art movement came into existence in the mid-1960s? Impressionism, optical art, or modern art? Optical art. Which of the following was a famous movement by white students in the 1960s? The student movement, the teacher movement, or the education movement? The student movement. Who was mainly involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement in 1964? The US, Russia, or Vietnam? The US. Who was elected as the US president in 1969? Spiro Agnew, Richard Nixon or Tricia Nixon's Cox? Richard Nixon. What was the name of the wife of the President of the U.S. in 1969? Thelma Catherine, Elizabeth Ann Bloomer, or Eleanor Rosalind Smith? Thelma Catherine. Question 17. When was Harold Wilson elected as Prime Minister of the UK? 1964 or 1968? (1964). What was the age of Harold Wilson when he became Prime Minister? 31, 35, or 40? (31). Who served as Prime Minister of the UK from 1963 to 1964? Edward Heath, Alec Douglas Home, or James Callaghan? Alec Douglas Home. Who led the NAACP in the 1960s? A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, or William Wilkins? Roy Wilkins. How many demonstrators took part in the March on Washington in 1963? More than 200,000, more than 100,000, or more than 500,000? More than 200,000. How many members were in the Beach Boys band formed in the 1960s? 3, 5, or 2? 5. Where was the band The Velvet Underground formed in 1964? California, New York, or Manchester? New York. When was the English band The Hollies formed? 1965, 1962, or 1969? (1962). Which of the following is not a song by the Kinks in the 1960s? All Day and All of the Night, You Really Got Me, or Runaway? Runaway. Who was the 15th Chief Justice of the United States in 1969? Warren Earl Burger, Morrison Remick, or Charles Evans? Warren Earl Burger. How long was the highway from Selma, Alabama to the state capital of Montgomery, where the protest march was held in 1965? 54 miles, 70 miles, or 100 miles? 54 miles. How many marches took place from Selma to Montgomery in 1965? 3, 10, or 5? 3. Who began the program The Great Society in 1964? Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, or Richard Nixon? Lyndon B. Johnson. Who was a famous anti-feminist in the 1960s? Martin Luther King, Phyllis Stuart Schlafly, or Indira Gandhi? Phyllis Stuart Schlafly. Who was the president of Russia in 1960? Nikita Sergeyevich, Alexander Rutskoy, or Dmitry Medvedev? Nikita Sergeyevich. Who became the Chancellor of West Germany in 1969? Wilhelm Kono, Wilhelm Marx, or Willy Brandt? Willy Brandt. When did the Delano grape strike occur? 1965, 1970, or 1966? 1965. Who stated that landing on the moon was America's top priority? John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, or Richard Nixon? John F. Kennedy. What number of president was John F. Kennedy? The 40th, the 35th, or the 30th? The 35th. How old was Jackie Kennedy when she became the First Lady? 35, 31, or 28? She was 31. Which state did Charles de Gaulle rule from 1959 to 1969? French, German, or Cuban? The French state. Who was the leader of the Cultural Revolution in 1966? Bradford, Margaret Sanger, or Mao Zedong? Mao Zedong. Who was Malcolm X? African American, Asian, or a European? An African American. Question 40. What was Rachel Carson's novel published in 1962, Silent Spring, based on? Environmental concerns, racism, or feminism? Environmental concerns. Which band did Paul McCartney create in the 1960s? The Beatles or the Byrds? The Beatles. Which album was released by the English rock band the Rolling Stones in 1968? The Velvet Underground, Beggar's Banquet, or Forever Changes? Beggar's Banquet. Whose album was Blonde on Blonde, released in 1966? Bob Dylan, The Beatles, or Captain Beefheart? Bob Dylan. Who arranged the album Trout Mask Replica by Captain Beefheart in 1969? John, George, or Adam? John. Name the last album by Jimi Hendrix Experience, released in 1968. Electric Ladyland, Highway 61 Revisited, or The Who Sellout? Electric Ladyland. What was the name of the third album of Elvis Presley, released in 1960? Blue Hawaii, GI Blues, or Liege and Leaf? GI Blues. More was the first album of which band, released in 1969? Warren Mitchell, The Kinks, or Pink Floyd? Pink Floyd. Which of the following is not an album by the Beatles in the 1960s? Me and My Shadows, Beatles for Sale, or Please, Please Me? Me and My Shadows. Which song is not included in the album Come the Day, released in 1966? Let It Bleed, Turn, 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 or Island of Dreams? Let It Bleed. And we are halfway through. Question 50. Which of the following albums was not released in the 1960s? West Side Story, South Pacific, or The Sound of Music? South Pacific. Who acted as Holly in Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1961? Patricia Neal, Luke Prosser, or Audrey Hepburn? Audrey Hepburn. How old was Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate in 1967? 28, 30, or 34? What was the role of Dennis Hopper in the movie Easy Rider in 1969? Billy, Bob, or Wyatt? Billy. Which of the following is not a movie by Jane Fonda from the 60s? They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Sunday in New York, or Clute? Clute. In which of the following movies did Robert Redford act in the 60s? Cat Ballou, Barefoot in the Park, or Tall Story? Barefoot in the Park. What was the genre of Mary Poppins, released in 1964? Musical fantasy, romance comedy, or sci-fi comedy? Musical fantasy. Which of the following is not a sci-fi movie of the 1960s? Planet of the Apes, The Day of the Triffids, or Dr. Zhivago? Dr. Zhivago. Which of the following is a rom-com from the 1960s? Purple Noon, The Apartment, or Grease? The Apartment. The 1960s movie All Night Long is a musical drama, thriller, or crime romance? Musical drama. And let's go to question 60. How many seasons does the 1960s sitcom Bewitched have? 8, 4, or 6? 8. When did the last season of Rawhide air? 1968, 1965, or 1966? 1965. Who acted as Arthur in the movie The Family Way in 1966? John Mills, Hywell Bennett, or Rowan Atkinson? Hywell Bennett. Who wrote the novel The Bell Jar in 1963? Sylvia Plath, Saul Bellow, or Zadie Smith? Sylvia Plath. What is the theme of the book A Wrinkle in Time, published in 1962? Science fantasy, romance, or comedy? Science fantasy. Which famous novel of Roald Dahl was published in 1964? No multiple choice here. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Which of the following is a book by Anthony Burgess in the 1960s? A House for Mr. Biswas, The Godfather, or A Clockwork Orange? A Clockwork Orange. Complete the name of the book published in 1960. Green Eggs and Ham, Bread, or Milk? Ham. Which was the best-selling horror novel of the 1960s? Rosemary's Baby, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or The Crying of Lot 49? Rosemary's Baby. Which novel won the Pulitzer Prize in 1961? Harriet the Spy, To Kill a Mockingbird, or Mastering the Art of French Cooking? To Kill a Mockingbird. Which pizza delivery chain was founded in the 1960s? Papa Sala's, Pizza Hut, or Domino's? Domino's. Which of the following breakfast cereals was invented in 1961? Corn Flakes, Oreo, or Quaker Oats? Quaker Oats. Which of the following was launched in 1961? Nescafe, Lipton Tea, or Coffee Mate? Coffee Mate. Which of the following cold drinks started life in Germany in 1961? Coca-Cola, Sprite, or Pepsi? Sprite. Which of the following instant food was started in the 1960s? Instant noodles, instant coffee, or instant mashed potato flakes? Instant mashed potato flakes. Which cereal did Kellogg's release in 1963? Fruit Loops, Chocos, or Rice Krispies? Fruit Loops. When were Pop-Tarts invented? 1969, 1964, or 1970? 1964. Who introduced teppanyaki in New York in 1964? Japanese, Chinese, or Benihana? Benihana. Who invented SpaghettiOs in 1965? Donald Edward Goerke, Jimi Hendrix, or George Harrison? Donald Edward Goerke. Who invented the chocolate fondue in the 1960s? Conrad Egli, Marie Antoine Karim, or Mary Winehouse? Conrad Egli. Which McDonald's menu item was created in 1965? Filet of fish, nuggets, or fries? Filet of fish. When was Cool Whip introduced to American homes? 1960, 1969, or 1966? 1966. Where were Doritos invented in the 1960s? In Disneyland, in a restaurant, or at home? Disneyland. Where were Pringles first sold in the 1960s? The US, the UK, or Africa? In the US. Which is a memorable gum from the 1960s? Fruit Stripe, Ding Dong, or Extra? Fruit Stripe. What was Starburst called in the UK in the 1960s? Fruit Candies, Opal Fruits, or Fruity Chews? Opal Fruits. Which cooking TV show did Fanny Cradock appear in 1963 on BBC? Christmas Cooking, Jukebox Jury, or Kitchen Party? Kitchen Party. In which of the following shows of the 60s did Fanny Cradock not appear in? Adventurous Cooking, Colorful Cookery, or Cooking Home? Cooking Home. Which food item did Taco Bell begin serving in the 1960s? Tex-Mex, Cottage Grove, or crepes? Tex-Mex. Which tennis player won the most slams in the 1960s? Butch Buchholz, Dennis Ralston, or Roy Emerson? Roy Emerson. What was the nickname of the famous footballer of the 1960s, Johnny Unitas? Johnny U, John, or Joe? Johnny U. What was the old name of the famous 1960s boxer Muhammad Ali? William Abelyan, Slave Donard, or Cassius Clay? Cassius Clay. When did Joan Baez start her recording career? 1962, 1966, or 1960? 1960. What was the English cricket season in 1960? The 61st, the 51st, or the 41st? The 61st. Who was the English cricketer born in 1968? Al Wadaker, Nasser Hussain, or F.J. Titmus? Nasser Hussain. Which of the following bridges was inaugurated in 1960? Almo Bridge, Akinado Bridge, or Akashi Kaikyo? Almo Bridge. Who designed the Manila International Airport, completed in 1961? Angel Knoxville, Araneta Coliseum, or Federico Illustre? Federico Illustre. Name the second person to step on the moon in 1969. Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, or Christian Bale? Buzz Aldrin. The Rizal Theater, when built, was built in 1961, 1962, or 1963? 1961. People born between 1965 and 1976 are called what? Generation X. Who invented the miniskirt in 1964? And the answer is Mary Quant. And of course, we have our bonus question. What was the most consumed material in the American textile industry in the 1960s? Let us know the answer in the comments and how you did. Thanks for playing this quiz. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you soon.